I'm Joe Glenton, and welcome back to Warrior Nation, the only podcast offering a critical lens on militarism in the UK. In this, our fifth series, we'll be speaking to anti-militarists around the world to explore their unique motivations, tactics, and approaches. Their expertise includes everything from opposing the arms trade and militarised borders to countering military recruiting and supporting war resistors. With UK government support for continuing wars in Ukraine and elsewhere, and now the bombing of Gaza, platforming and enabling anti-militarist discourse is vital. It follows that these conversations are more important than ever. If you enjoy what we produce and would like to support us to make more of it, then you can help us keep making Warrior Nation for as little as £2 a month via our Patreon, or you can support us through our donation page. And if you'd like to keep up to date with our work, you can sign up for our free monthly newsletter. Connection is a Germany-based anti-militarist organisation whose main role is supporting conscientious objectors. One of their main projects at the moment is supporting war resistors from Ukraine, Belarus and Russia. Connection EV Executive Board Member Marah Frech joins us now. Marah, thank you for joining us. Great to have you on. I'm familiar with your organisation from years ago when I was locked up as a conscientious objector, and they were very active around my case, which was in the UK, and I had quite a bit. This was kind of 2010 when I was sent to jail. But I've always kept an eye on your organisation. I always really appreciate the work that they do. So thank you very much for making time to come on. I just wanted to, for our listeners, can you just talk to us a little bit about Connection's history and some of your current campaigns?
Of course. Well, conscientious objection has always been at the center of Connection, and it started during the early 90s with a counseling service for conscientious objectors and people who opted for civil service instead of military training. And in that respect, our work hasn't changed much. But in 2011, Germany suspended mandatory military service. So that influenced our work. But in 2011, we already worked internationally to support conscientious objection movements abroad and to enhance protection mechanisms in the EU. That means that our topic stayed more or less the same since the early 90s, but the scope of our work has been increasing since then. And since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, a major part of our energies has been channeled into the object war campaign. I think I'm going to tell more about the object war campaign in a minute. But apart from this campaign, we also work with organizations and people from countries like Israel, Turkey, South Korea, Colombia, Eritrea, Georgia, just to name a few countries here.
Thank you. I wanted to, as you mentioned there, I wanted to come on to, I suppose, one of your main projects at the moment is dealing with resistors and objectors who come from, as I understand it, the main belligerents in the Russian-Ukraine war. So that's Russia and Ukraine, obviously, but also, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, Belarus. Yeah. And can you tell us where that campaign is at the moment?
Yeah, I think I need to go back to February 2022 to talk about the campaign. That was when hundreds of people tried to flee Russia, Belarus and Ukraine since the war had just broke out. And they fled to avoid being killed in the war or to kill themselves. They all opposed the war, they said, without us. But their decision wasn't respected, and their decision isn't respected today either. They don't receive the protection they need. That was when we launched the Object War campaign. That is a team of 4 organizations, mainly in Europe. It's the European Bureau for Conscientious Objection, the War Resisters International, the International Fellowship of Reconciliation and Connection. And we have many more organizations in the background. From the very first day, there had been up to 100 civil organizations in different European countries that backed our campaign. And we all support conscientious objectors, draft evaders, and deserters from all countries affected by the war. That means Russia, Belarus, as you just said, and Ukraine. We have some demands to the countries affected by the war, as well as the European Union. So let me break down these demands. From the government of Russia and Belarus, we demand to immediately stop the persecution of conscientious objectors and deserters, which manifests itself in the repression and imprisonment of COs. And in Belarus, even the death penalty for deserters. From the government of Ukraine, we demand that the right to conscientious objection will be restored, because that right has been suspended by martial law. And we also demand to stop the persecution of people who oppose the war. And from the European Union, we demand to open its borders for conscientious objectors and deserters, and to enhance asylum and protection mechanisms. This also includes war resisters and human rights defenders, because they are repressed in their countries. And I'd like to quote a colleague of mine here, Olga Karvach. She's the head of the Belarusian organization Nasz Dom, and she has been supporting our campaign from the very first day on, and she currently lives in Lithuania in exile. She explained that supporting conscientious objectors, I'm quoting here, is cheaper than any missile. So why isn't it being done? We want to protect human life. The simplest approach to ensure that those who do not want to take part in the war are not forced to do so is the right to conscientious objection. And it is important to know that the right to conscientious objection is the only internationally recognized agreement to protect war resisters, as there is, as far as I'm informed, no ground for desertion. Desertion is usually considered treason and severely punished. We can see that in Belarus, where it is punished with death penalty. So these are all precautions by a state to ensure that they perform well in war. And we know that. We have no illusions that we could be successful in implementing the right to conscientious objection everywhere, but we use it as a tool of advocacy and a method to call out human rights violations. That also means that our work doesn't end here. So we do not only publish press releases or advocate for the right to conscientious objection, but we try to intervene socially and politically as well. And I think the Object War campaign was successful because we could support many individuals during their asylum procedures so far. And as I said before, we have an alliance of 100 civil society organizations in the background. And this is also astonishing to have that many people across Europe supporting our campaign, supporting our demands to protect asylum, protect conscientious objectors, protect war resisters, and to support them in their objection to the war, because that is what we can do. We can't object personally. We have to support those who object.
Sure. So can I just clarify there that it's because obviously this topic is very close to my heart. So in those countries, there is a provision in law generally for conscientious objection, but it's been suspended because of martial law. Is that correct?
That is correct for Ukraine. In Russia and Belarus, there is theoretically still a possibility to opt for conscientious objection. But as we know, there is a lot of punishment for people who object to the war, especially in Russia. We know of prison terms up to 13 years. For people who object to the war, for people who speak about the war in terms of war, because as we know, it's called a special operation. So yes, we still have conscientious objection in Russia and Belarus, but it is suspended in Ukraine.
Sure. And I'm sure my experience, I'll say, of this is that in the UK, even if there is a provision for it, they still can make it very, very hard by other means. They can make it very difficult. And I imagine that's the same. And penalties up to death in Belarus.
Desertion, yes.
You were saying.
Not for conscientious objection, of course.
Yeah. I see. Yeah, sure. Are there in terms of the asylum stuff, because I think this is a unique topic because it has this aspect of anti-militarism and objection and desertion and war resistance, but it also has this aspect of asylum, that people are seeking asylum. Are there specific differences in how people would approach getting asylum based on which of those three countries they're from?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, let me start with some numbers here in an attempt to understand the magnitude of the topic of asylum in the European Union. So far, we know of more than 250,000 potential military conscripts who left Russia since February 24th, 2022. This is only about 30% of all people who left Russia. And most of these people seek protection in neighboring countries, that is outside the European Union. These are countries like Kazakhstan, Serbia, Montenegro, Turkey. Israel is also one of the main destination countries. And less than 10% of people on the move from Russia enter the European Union. This is completely different for Ukrainian people. According to estimates, there is more than 225,000 Ukrainian citizens of military service age that left the country, and most of them left for the European Union. And many more are still hiding in Ukraine to avoid being recruited, of course. And not only do the numbers differ between Russia and Ukraine, but the reception conditions do too. And this is where it gets interesting. Ukrainian citizens already benefited from visa-free entry into the Schengen area before the war. And their situation has been better than the situation for Russian people, and it still is. Because with the decision of the Council of the European Union to apply the so-called Temporary Protection Directive, Ukrainian nationals and all non-Ukrainians with a permanent residence permit in Ukraine as of February 24th, 2022, they can stay in the European Union for the time being and without asylum procedures. They still enjoy the right to temporary humanitarian residence in all member states of the European Union. And in that case, it doesn't matter whether they are subject to military service or not. And according to the current European law, this protection mechanism expires after a maximum of 3 years. What does it mean? It means that we still don't know what will happen after March 2025 for Ukrainian citizens. In contrast, visa agreements between Russia and the European Union have been interrupted by the war. And until today, humanitarian visas only play a very marginal role. Although many politicians from various political factions in the EU declared that they would offer protection to Russian conscientious objectors, including, for example, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, it is still very difficult for Russian citizens to enter the European Union and to stay here legally. The German Federal Office for Migration and Refugees, which we call BAMF, it is responsible for assessing asylum applications, and the BAMF is still rejecting asylum applications from Russians who objected to the war. I have a quote, which is very interesting. The BAMF stated that, and now it is legal terms, it cannot be assumed with a considerable probability that the applicant would be forcibly conscripted into the armed forces against his will. Well, we can see that this statement does not reflect the harsh reality in Russia, but says that applicants have to prove that they would have been recruited if they had stayed in Russia, which is of course very difficult because they fled the country, some of them in a rush, and they have no proof of their possible recruitment. And we can see that in Russia, the number of persecutions for desertion, unauthorized removal, or insubordination increased significantly since the war. And of course, so did the number of asylum applications from Russian refuseniks. According to the BAMF, Russia is now one of the top 10 countries with the most asylum seekers in Germany. That is very impressive, I think. And, well, all of these people are in precarious situations because only 1.2% of applications receive a positive decision. So what we see is that the legal situation for Ukrainians is so far quite good. They can stay here without application process until March 2025. For Russians, on the other hand, it is very complicated, and only deserters have a chance to be granted asylum at the moment. So yes, absolutely different.
Yeah, it sounds very complicated. The numbers you've stated there are massive. I wasn't expecting them to be that big. It's hundreds of thousands of people. For the Russians, for example, will they be deported? Have people been deported back? Is that the plan when you're saying a very low number of people are accepted and only under very specific conditions? Would they simply be sent back to Russia?
Well, officially not. It's not possible at the moment because there's no direct connection between Germany and Russia. And the numbers I just told you are the numbers for Germany. And we have to keep in mind that we have a regulation in the European Union, which is called Dublin III regulation. And that means that people have to apply for asylum in the country they first entered the European Union, which means that many applications for asylum in Germany are rejected because of this regulation. So people are not allowed to apply for asylum in Germany, but they have to, for example, go back to Poland and apply for asylum in Poland because that's where they entered the European Union. Which is, of course, a very comfortable situation for Germany because we are surrounded by Switzerland not, but we are surrounded by European Union countries, so we are not the country of first entrance.
I see. So I want to talk about, because what we're really trying to get at with this podcast is the kind of the nuts and bolts, to use a slightly clumsy term. So someone comes from one of these countries and they arrive in Germany. What is the kind of daily work? What is the process, the kind of granular process of work which your organisation does to support them? So let's say someone turns up, claims asylum. How do you move in and help these people?
Okay. Usually people call us or write us an email because they have heard about our counseling hotline. They have read about our campaign online. And then we try to figure out what is the best way for people to apply for asylum, and we try to support them during their asylum procedures. And I can say that our phone rings every day. It rings several times. People call us to receive information how to leave the Ukraine, for example, or how to apply for asylum in Germany. And what we do is to first decide whether we are responsible or whether we can be responsible to support them, or whether it's better to forward them to one of our partner organizations. As I've said before, we are an alliance of many organizations, and we also have partner organizations in Russia, in Belarus, in the Ukraine. And for some people, it is way easier to just talk to people from their home countries. So once they are in Germany and they want to apply for asylum here, we usually help them. And we try to give them information about the legal situation, which is, of course, very complicated, especially in a foreign language. And we always encourage them to think about their past activities. Have they been politically active, for example? As I said before, it's very difficult to receive an asylum status in the European Union. But one method to receive protection is to receive political protection against political persecution. So if people have been politically active before, if they have spoken out against the war in the home countries, this is a very good start. We try to collect these informations. We try to collect articles, their tweets, for example, and try to strengthen their position against the war publicly, because that is what the asylum authorities want to see at the end. But I must admit that we get a lot of calls from people that are just very desperate because they want to leave the country, or they manage to leave the country, we cannot do much here because we are bound to the asylum procedures in our country. Yeah. And we get a lot of calls from Ukrainian soldiers who have been fighting in the war, and they are done with the war. They have been fighting for more than the promised limit of 18 months, and they suffer. They can't be part of the military anymore. They are traumatized by war. They're injured. They have war tremors, or they tremble when they speak. And this is when it gets complicated, because if they are still in the Ukraine, they have to find a way out of the Ukraine, but they are not allowed to do so because men, and it's almost always men, are not allowed to leave the country. So as you can see, the situation is difficult, and we try to give our best to give them the information they need, and try to connect them with the organizations that could help them. Or if they have a chance of asylum in Germany, we support them during their asylum procedures.
Sure. There's a question here that we because again, this episode is about seeing how people actually operate, so we can all share those stories and those experiences. But I suppose there's a question here about how you measure your successes and your failures, so you can shape what you do around them. And that's not always an easy question. In fact, it's very rarely an easy question. But and it's also, as Or, one of our previous guests, pointed out, it's difficult to put a metric on people's lives, and it's a very impersonal way to deal with people who are often very traumatized. But how do you, as much as you can, measure your progress around this particular campaign?
Yeah, I think numbers are very important, as we've seen. But numbers are not the only thing that is important for us, and it's not the only way to measure success. I think it's also legislation. It would be a huge success if the right to conscientious objection was strengthened. But of course, I have no illusion that this will happen during wartime in Russia or Belarus or the Ukraine. So Germany and France, for example, started to grant asylum to Russian deserters. That is a success, for example. I mean, there's still no protection for draft evaders, and we desperately need it because the majority of people who come to Germany are draft evaders and not deserters. But at least we have gained some level of protection, and we try to enhance that. We try to enhance protection mechanisms. Another way to measure success is public cooperation between Russians and Ukrainians, for example, because personal relations are the foundation of our work. Personal networks function very well in situations of war, in situations of political crisis. And we can see that in the Ukrainian exile community, there is currently a lot of pressure to publicly speak out against the war, because they want to uphold the narrative of fighting and winning the war. And it is quite difficult to start a public cooperation between Russians and Ukrainians, because yes, they can speak out against the war together, but it's difficult for Ukrainians to make their own objection to war public. So they usually go into hiding in Germany, and they are refugees here, but they don't talk about their objection. And our general demand to object war in all countries and to support people coming from all the countries could be an obstacle for public cooperations between Russians and Ukrainians. But I think it is very important psychologically as well as politically to have these cooperations and to publicly speak about the war and show that the people are not those who are at war with each other. They are still no enemies. Most of them have family or friends in the neighboring countries. And so we try to support people who want to get in contact with the other side. And we already have several small groups of young people, mostly young people from Ukraine and Russia, who get to know each other, who try to think about creative ways to go public, to talk in public about the war. And I think that is success already. And and of course, being in alliance with more than 100 civil organizations is success, I think. With the Alliance, we have a great media echo, for example, on our action days. So people want to get to know what we're doing. We give interviews almost every day, and that way reach the public. And it's important to reach the German public, for example, because they are in a position to demand changes in the asylum system.
Sure, that's fair. I wonder if you could. I wonder if you can give me some example. I'm very interested in this idea of young Ukrainian exiles and young Russian exiles working together. That seems to me, I take that as a sign of something to be hopeful about. Can you give me some examples of are they doing open activism, or is it more behind closed doors, or what's going on there? What things are they doing?
I think it's both. We already had a group that met and that tried to consolidate, but at the end we couldn't work with them because they had the problem that the Russian people wanted to speak out against the war, but the Ukrainian people didn't want them to say that the people from Ukraine can object to the war as well. So that was a cooperation that didn't made it at the end. On the other side, we have a group of, I think, 3 Ukrainian men that are currently in the process of getting to know 2 people from Russia, and they are trying to consolidate a group. What will happen next is still unclear, but they try to get to know each other. They try to talk about the war, about their positions, about their objections. And I think the goal is to go public somehow, to maybe have an action day, to have a talk together, to record videos. It doesn't matter, but it's a very long way from the first meeting to go public together, because they have to build that trust that is very important for our actions.
Yeah, I can see there's some. It must be a very challenging environment to work in. I can see that. I can understand with Russia, if you frame Russia as the aggressor, which I think is correct, that Ukrainian people might not want to join the military, but they might also, as the people who've been invaded, they might have a kind of ongoing loyalty to the narratives of the Ukrainian government and so on. So that it must be very challenging
for them. Yes, of course. We still support them, but it's not on us to tell them what to say or what not to say, I think. But I imagine it to be very difficult. But we know of so many Ukrainian men who fled to the European Union, and a majority of these people are military conscripts, and they know that too. It's just a matter of publicly speaking about it or not.
So people arrive, and then are you centrally involved in the legal processes, the German asylum processes? Do you also support them through that, or is it more the initial phases and advice? I'm very interested in how these people, also how they live. I mean, some people, because of international treaties, I guess, will have certain rights and others don't. How do they live? What can they do? How do they support themselves materially? Could you it may be in broad strokes, just give us an idea of what the legal processes are and how people live while they're waiting to be processed?
Yeah, sure. The situation differs. So people from the Ukraine can just enter the European Union with a valid passport, and they can stay here until March 2025 without any legal processes. So a lot of them have family or friends in other European countries, and they leave Ukraine, visit their family and friends, and try to get settled and try to find a job, find a place for their children, and live a, well, quote unquote, normal life, if that is possible at all. They can apply for work because that is possible. So the situation for Ukrainians is okay, I think, at the moment. They are relatively independent from the state once they cross the border. The situation for Russians is again complicated. If we talk about deserters, they can apply for asylum in Germany if they didn't register in Poland, for example. So from our perspective, we can only support the people who have been long enough in Germany that they can apply here, because the Dublin 3 regulation expires after 6 months, and then they can apply in Germany. And in that case, yes, we support them during their asylum application, but we also have lawyers. So our main task is to connect the right people, to connect lawyers and objectors, to find newspapers that are willing to write about them, because public attention is very important during the asylum process. And that's also why I can't tell you a lot about the reception conditions in Germany, because that is only like a very marginal part of our work. But I know, of course, that the reception conditions in Poland or Hungary, for example, are difficult. So people can cross the border, but they are not very welcomed at the moment. So we, of course, encourage people to try to come to Germany if they have family or friends here. But then again, we have the problem with Dublin 3. So the situation is complicated. It's legally complicated.
If you enjoy what we produce and would like to support us to make more of it, then you can help us keep making Warrior Nation for as little as £2 a month via our Patreon, or you can support us through our donation page. And if you'd like to keep up to date with our work, you can sign up for our free monthly newsletter. See the show notes for more details. Sure. And I always, ultimately, conscientious objection, anti-militarism hinges on questions about the state. The state wants to compel, states around the world want to compel people to do things, in this case fighting wars. But in terms of the German state, is it resistant to these people coming over? Is it pro? I can't imagine. Slightly rhetorical question there. But is there a sense that the state's response to these different groups is hostile or neutral? Or, I mean, how does it work out there? What kind of challenges do they face from the German governments?
I wouldn't say hostile, because as we have seen, deserters from Russia, for example, are granted asylum in Germany and France. And the general atmosphere is positive as well, I would say, towards Ukrainian people, of course, and also towards Russian people. But promises weren't kept, and the promises for military service evaders weren't kept. They can come to Germany, but they are usually rejected. So we have the public discourse, which is positive towards those people. And we have politicians that officially support people who object to the war. But the BAM decides very differently. And we still do not have a solution for the many, many people who come to Germany as conscript draftees. And they are here, and there is no protection mechanism for them. And politicians do not work on that topic either. So there is a huge difference between what is being said and what is being done. But I would say that the German society has like a positive attitude towards the people from both sides. Mm-hmm. And we have a huge interest in people who speak out publicly, in people who tell their personal stories. Because, there is a general negative feeling towards the war in Ukraine. And I think this is at least a good situation for people who come to Germany, because people from other wars, it is quite difficult to be here, to be a part of society. And I think the situation for Russians and Ukrainians is easier. And then for people from Syria, for example.
And on the topic, so you're obviously understandably very interested in people who are willing to speak out. How do you help them get a platform? Is there media training from your partner organisations or yourself? How do you support those people who are willing to take their objections public?
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends whether they want to stay anonymous or they want to go in public with their name and their stories. What we do is to write about them, to give them a platform on our channels, and we try to connect them to newspapers, and they are very interested in personal stories. So they have the chance to tell their story, to tell their point of view, and to be part of the public movement against the war. We also do interviews ourselves. We have a YouTube channel. We publish videos there, and we try to support every kind of action. We have many demonstrations, and it is very welcomed if Russian objectors, for example, want to speak at these demonstrations, and they are given a platform to speak again and to tell their stories. So there's not only one way to do it. We find creative ways to support them, and we find these ways with the person that wants to go public, because they have different opinions. They do not feel comfortable in the same situation. So we try to speak with them and try to support their way of going public. Because at the end, it's not about us, it's about them. And they have to cope with the reactions they get. So we try to make sure that they feel comfortable, that they have the support from the people around them, that they can go back after going public, and not to live in fear, that they just can stick to their decision to go public, because once their declaration is out, they cannot take it back.
Definitely. I wonder, there is a question there. You make a couple of very interesting points there. That of course it is about them. It is about them and not yourselves. But also, it's of interest, I think, particularly for the theme of this podcast, is you've told me you're dealing with people often who are very traumatized, people who are displaced. That's still it's a tough job for the people who are doing it. Yourself, for example, how do you in the grind of activism, which I've often neglected in my own activism, but how do you maintain your own energy and your own drive to do that? Because I know it's tough when you're faced with, particularly in this kind of role, where you're faced with lots of people who are very traumatized, very confused, their families are far away, etc., etc. But how do you maintain that energy and focus?
I think that depends. I can only speak for myself, and for me, it is very good to have this big alliance of organizations and people in the background, especially our cooperations with countries where there is still military service. It's very important to me, because I can speak to people who have actually had the experience of being conscripted themselves. So this is still not the same situation as the situation of Ukrainian and Russian refugees, but it is a way to me to understand their situation better. And in general, I would say we talk a lot, like in our team, but also with the people who are affected by this war. And the people I talk to, the people that are in Germany, they're usually very happy to be here. So the most difficult part of their journey is already over. And once they decide to go public, they usually feel a certain level of, they feel comfortable to be here, because otherwise they wouldn't go public. So the situation for me, I think it's way easier than for organizations who, for example, help people to leave the country, because they help people during a moment that is very difficult. Yeah, and I think it's just good to know that we do something against the breakdown of our asylum system, against the war, and we have a great community in the background. We have great people, and that helps a lot.
Can you, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's very impressive to me. Since the start of the war, you've made an alliance of over 100 organizations all around Europe, the world. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that got started, and who else is there? What other organizations are there that we need to be paying attention to as international anti-militarists?
Yeah, the alliance is mostly European, because when we talk about the war and our situation, we mostly talk about asylum mechanisms, because people come to Germany, come to other European countries for protection. So the alliance mirrors that situation. It's mostly Central European organizations. Apart from our core team of those 4 organizations, I4, WRI, EBGO, and Connection, we have about 100 grassroots organizations in the background. These are small groups of people who want to do something against the war and who support our demands and who do actions themselves. They participate at our action days. Last year we had 3 international action days. That was on May 15. That is the International Day for Conscientious Objection. Then there is the International Day of Peace, I think, and the International Day of Human Rights. And those grassroots organizations did actions. They organized protests. There were rallies in front of embassies, for example. But they only use our material and the information we produce, like country reports, like updates on the legal situations. They use all these, but they do the actions themselves. So they work independently of our organization. And I think that is very good, because they know the region they work at, and they know what fits their group, their region, and so they can contact us for support, but they can also just use our materials and do the actions themselves. And yeah, that's basically how our campaign is structured. But we also work together on an institutional level. So we had a petition that was launched via the platform You Move Europe. And this petition was addressed to European politicians. And we've collected, together with the 100 organizations in the background, we've collected around 50,000 signatures with our demands. And we couldn't have done that without these organizations. That's just one example how all the grassroots movements at the end come together on the international level.
Fantastic work. I wonder if we could, for our listeners, and part of what we're trying to achieve here is more connection between organisations around Europe, the UK, the States, wherever. Where would people go to find out more about you? But also, how do people support the excellent work that you're doing? How do people get involved in some capacity?
Yeah, we have a website. I think that is the core of our work. The website is connection.ev.org. We also have a campaign website, which is objectwarcampaign.org. And this is where you can find all the informations. This is where you find updates, action days, where you find country reports. We also have a counseling hotline and a Telegram channel in different languages. And people can use these channels to find updates in their language, in Russian, in Ukrainian, in German, or English, some also in Spanish. And for people who want to get involved, I think they can try to get organized. They can try to consolidate with people and build a group and just do actions on their own. As I've already said, we have materials that they can use. They can also order banners, for example, stuff like that. But also a guide on how to do an action, what kind of action is possible, where should they go, what can they do. This is all information that we give to them. But they have to get active themselves in organizing a group, or they can join an existing group, which we have many across Europe. And I also think that you can counter militarism on different levels. So getting involved in activism and protests is just one way to counter militarism. But I think you can even start by asking yourself, what is happening around us? And am I complicit to militarism? Am I complicit to the war? And how can I opt out of that complicity? And you have to do that process for yourself. And then you can start to find a group of people to get organized with, and you can start to get in contact with people who are affected by the war. I think it's very easy to get to know Russian or Ukrainian people, for example, because there are a lot of Ukrainian Russian people here in Germany or in the European Union. So why not start to get in contact with them and ask them how you can support their cause? Yes, I mentioned personal relations a lot because I think that is the foundation of our work. And it is very important to find those people and to listen to them in our position, because we are in a comfortable position. What we can do is to listen to people who are affected and ask them, how can I support you?
Thank you, Marah. We'll round it up, but thank you very much for coming on. Thank you for your time. This has been Warrior Nation. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. We want to reach as many listeners as possible, so whatever platform you're hearing this on, please pop us a 5-star rating. Apparently, it really helps in terms of spreading the word. You can follow us on Twitter or Instagram on @ForcesWatch. See you next time.